Brothers and sisters, as we're about to commence tonight's program, those brothers and sisters who are making their way out, I would kindly request for you to not congregate in the coat rooms as those conversations will interrupt the program as we get started here. And as you're heading out, one reminder again for those of you who weren't here yesterday, we did receive some reports of people driving extremely fast in the parking lots. So please be mindful of that as you're leaving tonight. Additionally, for mothers who wish to stay and listen to the lecture, there is a multi-purpose room with a projector, so you're welcome to stay there. And lastly, ziyarat will be recited at the conclusion of tonight's lecture. I would now like to request Hujjatul Islam, Shayk Rizwan Arastu, to please come to the podium at this time. Salawat by Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. لقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. During these last few nights that we've been together, we've been talking about nifaq and munafiqeen, this idea of hypocrisy and two-facedness. And we've looked at a couple of surahs of the Quran. In particular, we looked at Surah Al-Munafiqun and Surah Al-Ma'un. And now we've taken one verse from Surah Al-Baqarah in the beginning, where Allah describes the Munafiqun with a few attributes. So we want to see what those attributes are and see what we can learn from them. Reciting salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The verse that I just recited is the attribute we want to look at. When these munafiqeen are told not to cause fasad, not to cause corruption, trouble, fitna, a lot of different aspects or examples you can think of what fasad would entail depending on what you're talking about. When they're told not to cause fasad and corruption and trouble, their response is that actually we are reformers. Why are you telling us not to cause trouble? Our intention is actually the opposite, and we consider ourselves to be reformers. But Allah weighs in and judges them and says, no, actually they are the troublemakers, the ones who think they are fixing things and reforming things. They are the ones who are causing the breakdown of things and the corruption of things. But they don't realize it. So this raises a really important question for all of us. I introduced it yesterday talking about the kinds of illusions that we live in this world. When you apply for college, when you apply for a job, you put together a resume, you list all your credentials, and you try to sell yourself to this institution to say that I'm worthy of this job. And there are definitely going to be qualifications that you have that you can present in an honest way and say, I've done this, I've accomplished these things, here are the skills that I have, here are the certificates and credentials that I've studied for and I've acquired. Those are honest things that you can present about yourself. Sometimes we shy away from that kind of dynamic. We tend to, as Muslims, we think the ideal is to be very humble, which is true, But humility doesn't mean that you don't present yourself as qualified for the task for which you are qualified. An example that our ulama always give is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. Right, in Surah Yusuf, when the famine is about to hit, the dream has been seen by the king. Yusuf alayhi salam interprets the dream and says that based on this, we're going to have some years of plenty, followed by some years of famine. He says, "Ij'alni ala khaza'in al-ard, inni hakimun alim." Give me the job of managing our intake, storage, disbursement, all the food-related things. Put me in charge of that. Why? He mentions his own attribute. He praises him, not praises, but he mentions his own qualifications. I'm wise and I'm knowledgeable of this. Right? I have the qualifications that are necessary to think of a system and then execute it properly. Right? So it's not self-praise. He's not asserting something that he doesn't have. He's simply stepping up to the opportunity and saying, look, this is something that needs to happen. You can think of it as a wajib kifaya in our terms. It's a fard kifaya that we have to take care of our people. Otherwise, if we mismanage things now, then it's drought and death and suffering for years to come. So somebody has to do it. I'm qualified to do it. Let me do it. And that's not, of course, he's a prophet. He's a model for us. This is the way that we should step forward when our qualifications meet the task at hand. But what happens is that sometimes we pad the resume. Right? We'll advise our high school kids to join this club and join that club. There's some obscure club no one knows about. To join that club and you can become president of the club, and it looks really good on the resume when you say that I'm the president of this club. Did you do anything as president? What did the club meeting the whole year? What were your qualifications? What did you actually do as an officer of the club? Nothing. But it looks really good on the resume. Right? That's duplicity. You're deluding. You're trying to delude the college or whoever you're trying to apply to, and you're really deluding yourself. You're inflating your own ego and showing all these things that you're able to do and all these qualifications that you have, when it's really just a shell and there's nothing beneath it. That's not the way to present ourselves. But this is kind of the world that we live in, and we feel like we have to play the game. This is what everyone else does, so that's our justification that we should also do the same thing. The trick is, or the solution is, actually make yourself qualified. Don't pad your resume with things that are useless. Step up and actually do things. Community service is one of those things that people, unfortunately, our kids tend to want to pad their resume with because they've been told by the previous generation that, college admissions, they really love to see community service. Medical schools, they really love to see community service, so you should make sure that's on your resume. So now, with the end in mind, they forget that the whole purpose of community service is I need to learn how to give back, how to be involved in community, how to build and how to participate, and the real part of actually working in the community to fix and help and do good things, that's the important thing. And all those experiences that go with it. Learning that I should be generous with my time. As I do my own things for myself, I should do things for others. Learning how to manage an organization and some activity and learn how to plan it, and how to organize it and get people motivated and advertise. All those are great skills that are actually usable, marketable, useful skills in life. But if we're not careful, then we get distracted. Right on cue. If we're not careful, then we just take the facade. Right? Facade and facade, they're similar. They're not etymologically similar, but they sometimes come together. We take that facade that I need to put a good face, and so I try to sign up for community service events. Why? For the purpose of padding my resume, for the purpose of impressing people, rather than doing the community service event for the purpose of those actual good deeds and the good skills and all those real things that are there. So that's the kind of thing that we need to watch out for. And this is the reality of the world that we live in. There's deception all around. Advertising is like this. They want to sell you something, they show you something, they convince you that if you buy the product, you will also be happy and successful in all the things that you see in the picture and the video, and that's what they're selling you. They're selling you happiness. How? Through a candy bar. They're selling you happiness. How? Through this drug or this product or this device or whatever it might be. but now you can become popular, you can become famous, you can become good looking by buying this particular product. That has nothing to do with looks. It's not even a cosmetic. Right? So this is all deception and duplicity, and we need to watch out for these kinds of things. The quality of the munafiqeen is exactly this. They consider themselves muslih. Right? Muslih, just be familiar with the term as well. Salah with a sad and a ha at the end. Sometimes people, when they're saying the adhan, they'll say hayya ala salah with a ha at the end because they really want to get the ta marbuta. That's wrong. It's not salah. It's salah with a ta marbuta at the end. But now we're talking about salah, which is goodness, right? Reform. We want to get things upright. So the one who's trying to bring that about is a muslih, a reformer. And the opposite of that is fasad and the mufsid, spoiling things, ruining things, causing trouble. They think that they are muslih, they sell themselves as muslih, when in fact they are causing the opposite, trouble. So I introduced this idea yesterday, this experience that I had with, I hate to bring this topic up, but it's something that we're facing, and it's actually a perfect example for what we're talking about. So online there's a panel of Muslim LGBT leaders who are all speaking in defense of their position. And so I wanted to listen to them to see what they say, what their arguments are. One of the panelists is, he's actually written probably the best articulation of this group's position as a Muslim scholar. So one of the speakers there, his name is, I had never heard of it before, Da'i Abdullah, Imam Da'i Abdullah. So he's in New York. And I'm going to quote some of the things that he said, because their whole premise in everything they're doing is that they are bringing reform to Islam. Islam right now in their mind is too restrictive. We have all of these laws that were derived, and again, I'm quoting them, they're derived by people centuries ago, 1,000 years ago. And from ahadith that were spoken by a prophet who lived a millennium ago. People who are interpreting this Quran, which yes is a timeless book, but it was interpreted by them 1,000 years ago. And they didn't live with the realities that we live with now. And they decided that there are these certain restrictions. Now we have to look with new lenses, with new eyes. We have to look from our position, and we have to reform Islam. Right? This is their rhetoric. I'll quote a couple of things that he said so you can see in his own words. And one of the rhetorical questions he asked, which is, see how it is. He says, what right do Muslims have to say that another Muslim's way of doing things is sinful? Right? For him, he's saying, what right do you and I have to say that their way of life is sinful? Sometimes we also espouse a watered down version of this, and we think that that's his business. Let him. If she doesn't want to wear hijab, that's her business. If he doesn't want to pray, that's his business. If he doesn't want to do this or does want to do that, that's his business. And we kind of have this live and let live attitude, which is not part of the Islamic ethos. The Islamic ethos is al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. I do have a right. I have not only a right, I have an obligation. We don't even think about it it's not a right that I deserve. It's an obligation that I have. I have to answer to Allah if I have some ability to teach you or remind you or influence you, and you're doing something wrong or not doing something you should be doing, and I let it go without saying anything. It's not about right, whether I have the right to say what you're doing is wrong. I have an obligation, if I can, if you listen, to help you and get you back on the path. That's the attitude that we're supposed to have as Muslims. And the dynamic is not that I'm superior, I know so much, and I'm so good, I have everything right myself, so let me tell you, lowly people, what you should do right and what you're doing wrong. That's not the dynamic. The dynamic is that we are together, this wall, كَأَنَّهُمْ بُنْيَانٌ مَرْصُوصٌ, this wall against common enemies, against evil, against all these things that are working against goodness, against Allah. And that wall is only going to be as strong as the weakest part of that wall. And so if I'm failing, if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, that means all of us are weak. Our community is weaker because I'm weak. And if we want to build our community and make it strong, then whoever among you can, whoever has my ear, whoever has my ear, I think that's the right expression, that I'll listen to. If you have some influence over me, then it's your job to come and tell me in the best way possible, in the most respectful way possible that preserves my dignity, that look, you've been saying this or doing this, and actually it's not right, and here's the right way you should be doing it. And as you strengthen me, now we're all better for it. Our community is now stronger. But his question is, what right does one Muslim have to say that what another Muslim is doing is sinful? It's not that I'm not passing a fatwa. If I'm qualified for that, then yes, I even have that right. If I'm qualified to do ifta and to give a fatwa, then that's in its own place. But assuming that we're not mujtahideen here, then whatever has been designated in the Sharia as sin, as haram, if I identify it and I say, look what you're doing, it is haram. It goes out of the bounds of what the red lines are that Islam has laid down, as says our scholars. That's, again, it's my duty to educate you, to remind you, to help you to see that, look, this is what you're doing is outside of the bounds. Here's how you can get back in. Here's how you can fix things. Yeah, so this is not some kind of assumption of responsibility that I'm giving myself permission all of a sudden. I'm taking something that's not right. Allah has given us all the duty to help one another, to strengthen one another, to educate one another. Right? So the question he asks is an absurd kind of a question for any Muslim. When he starts his talk, he actually lets his whole premise be known. He says that as he was looking to reform Islam, he took as his model the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Right? He didn't look into Islam itself to find what is the core of Islam, what is what does Islam itself say, let's go back to Quran and authentic ahadith. He went outside of Islam and said, let's look at this document created by people. That's the standard of the highest level of justice. And now we need to interpret the Quran in a way that comes in line with what people have decided is fair and just. Another thing he says, he's talking about he says he runs a very inclusive inclusive mosque. And so what he means by that is he conducts LGBT marriages. He even talks about conducting marriages where a Muslim woman will want to marry a non-Muslim man, and no one else will do it because it's haram. It's not a valid marriage, but he'll do it. Right? So he does all of these services. And in the name of including people. He says that the problem is that other Muslims, they look at Islam through their own culture and their own biases. That's why they say that, two men marrying is not okay, because culturally they're not used to it. That's why they say a Muslim woman can't marry a non-Muslim man, because it's unusual for them in some foreign country, in some foreign time. And so based on those cultures, then they're interpreting Islam. But he thinks that he is now able to actually connect to the text itself. And without bias, he's now saying, no, all these things are perfectly fine. Who are you to say that this is not permissible? That this particular union, this particular marriage is wrong because it doesn't conform to what you know culturally. Right, so those are the kind of rhetoric that he uses to introduce his islah into Islam and to reform Islam. He uses the phrase, you have to break down barriers. These are all barriers that are there between halal and haram that all need to be broken down so everything can become halal. It sounds very nice when he says it. Break down barriers, become inclusive, everyone should be allowed. All of those things sound very good. It resonates with the audience, it pulls people in, it attracts people. But the core of it is this ifsad, that he wants to he's not looking to actually reform Islam, he's looking to put Islam aside and put human ideas like the Declaration of Human Rights or his own his own interests, basically, his interests and the interests of his own fasid community. That should be the standard now, and we should kind of break down barriers, change Islam in a way that basically there is no halal and haram anymore. We make our decisions, we make our own judgment. We basically are going to go do whatever we want to do and whatever we think is right. It's not up to Islam scholars, the text, to tell us anything. It's up to us to interpret all of those things in a way that is in line with what we already know to be right. So it's really a complete deforming of Islam into something that's no longer Islam at all. At one point he even uses an expletive to talk about the arguments that are based on Quran and Hadith. These age-old arguments for what's halal and haram based on Quran and Hadith, these are all, and he uses an expletive. That's our tradition. What scholars have thought for centuries, what is grounded in text, it's not just their word. They're laying out that based on this hadith and that verse and this argument, here's the ruling. He says, I'll put all that aside. Now we have to interpret. Interpret what? He's not able to even quote a verse of Quran correctly. Much less understand it. Much less use it as a source of law and reason and come up with some sort of a new plan. So this is a problem that we have in that community. We have other elements like that as well. People who want to reform Islam, that Islam is not quite right, there's something wrong with it, and we need to bring it up to date. We need to change it in a way that is better in their eyes than what it was. Recite wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let's turn to ourselves now and think of our own duties, because obviously doing islah, being a reformer, fixing things is a very good thing. That's a great concept, and that's definitely what we want to be doing. I want to divide up islah into two areas. There's one area of islah and reforming that is not for just anyone to do. This is in the realm of scholarship. If you're talking about reforming Islam, which means, for instance, reconnecting with the sources and addressing modern questions. This is already happening. And this is not the job of just regular people on the ground. This is the job of experts. And we actually, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, are in the best position to keep this islah up. Our maraji are one group of scholars that you are more familiar with, that you know more of about this. That is the whole reason why, as Shia, one of our requirements when we're doing taqleed is that we have to do taqleed of a living mujtahid, a faqih who is still alive. We can't say, well, there's someone 2 centuries ago, I think he was afqah, he was the best jurist, so I'm going to do taqleed of him. We have to find someone who is alive, who is the best jurist who is alive, and do taqleed of that person. And one of the basic reasons for that is that the ijtihad that he's doing has to be up to date. The best mind of today, with the best training of today, he's the one who is in the best position, there's no comparison even, in a much better position than any one of us to decide what should be the Islamic position with any new issue that comes up. Yes, you and I can have some opinion and think that maybe this and maybe that. We can have some guesses about what the position should be. But when it comes to an authoritative answer that's based on the sources, that's defensible, that he can present to any scholar and say, here's my argument for why this is haram or why this is wajib or whatever it is, they can look at it too and say, yes, I see your argument, I see everything makes sense, or here's a hole here, you need to fix this or address this, and they can demonstrate what the argument is, and it can be evaluated by peers. So the whole system of fiqh that we have, especially as followers of Ahlul Bayt, is a very living institution. Sometimes people don't realize how up to date those top level scholars are. But they are very much in touch with things. Just because they live across the world and you think that they live in a very simple way and maybe they're not connected in ways that you think means that you're up to date. Right? For us, if you're up to date with social media or with the latest technology and latest trends and these kinds of things, we think that makes you up to date with culture and with the times. Again, that's not substantive. There's nothing substantive about knowing the trends. That doesn't make you more in tune with the day, with the times. Seeing through the trends, seeing through the facade of things to what the real trends are. What is the moral direction of society? What are the moral vices of a society? What are the solutions to those moral vices? That kind of, whether you know the latest popular person in this field or that field, has no part to play in that. And the maraji' make an extremely concerted effort to keep in touch in that way. It's not only in the area of fiqh. We have scholars who are constantly in touch with these sources. We don't have this idea that something's already been taken care of, someone else has already understood this verse or this surah, so it's done, now let me work on something new. I remember describing Hawza studies when I was in the midst of it to some of you, maybe some of my peers, and I think comparing it to the way, for instance, scientific research happens. Right, over here, if you're in a scientific field, you don't necessarily have to redo the experiments of past people. You can look at the literature. Things are well accepted. They've been peer reviewed, and you can trust that this result is solid because of the system. And so you don't redo the experiment. You don't have to re-engage with the same idea. You can move forward and take the next step. And it's a good system in many ways. With Islamic studies, yes, we stand on the shoulders of previous scholars, but it's not in a way that we just outsource and say they've already taken care of it. They've understood it, so we can move on to the next step. Because the reality of this kind of knowledge is I can't actually take the next step unless I'm really well grounded in what has been learned before. So there is a kind of repetition where each person who now engages in the study of Islam needs to start from the beginning and take a trip through the great ideas of the past, the great arguments of the past, and understand well. And it's not until you're well grounded in what has already been known that you can now take one little baby step forward and say, I know everything that everyone else has said, I've understood it, and now I have a new idea, and I know enough to know that this new idea is actually worth taking. It's a step that's worth taking. Because sometimes you have some newfangled idea, and it's already been thought of and shot down by greats before you. Right? Not every new idea is necessarily an improvement. Sometimes you have a new idea that comes to your mind, but you don't realize that new idea has so many problems. Other people have already thought of it 100 times, and they've already decided that this is actually not a good idea because of so many reasons. But if you're immature and you think I'm going to go out on a limb on my own, then you don't benefit from the wisdom of past people. So the culture of the Hawza moves very slow. Slow not because it's lazy or there's no work going on there, but slow because it's very careful. So you'll see that even when scholars have a new idea, most often the culture of the Hawza is such, they won't say, nobody else has said this before and I'm the first one to say it. You'll never see that from our great scholars in the Hawza. If they do have some new idea, first of all, they're extremely hesitant to even put it out there. And if they do put it out there, they'll first try to see who else amongst the greats from the past has actually said the same thing. Maybe we just need to understand what they were saying. Right? So they'll try to link back and say, actually, Shaykh Tusi, when he was saying such and such, he also probably meant what I'm saying now. I'm not the first one to think it. Because it's scary to go out on a limb. When you're talking about life and death and you're talking about halal and haram, interpreting Islam, trying to speak for God, you can't take that lightly. If you're the first one to say something, then the first thing that goes through the scholar's mind is, what did I miss? How is it that all these great scholars, much greater than me, throughout history, never saw this, and I'm the first one to see it? I'm nobody to see something new. I must have missed something. Otherwise, someone else definitely would have thought of this before me. That's the first thought that comes to the scholar's mind in the culture of the Hawza. And so they have to check it and double check it, present it to peers, present it to students, and let that process play out. Let people attack it, argue through it. They push and I push back and see if my arguments hold. And that process has to happen, that dialectic has to happen. And then once it's vetted, once nobody's able to shoot it down, it's strengthened, any holes that were there are plugged, then the idea can come out as, okay, here's an idea. Apparently no one said it, and this seems to be strong. Everyone else is also on board with me. And so I take that step forward. So obviously that's going to be a very laborious process to go through all of that for any new idea. But what it does is it ensures that every step we take is deliberate and wise and based on so much knowledge and such a broad support. That's how reform happens of Islam. Again, it's not Islam itself that's being reformed, the Islam that Allah has sent down to Rasulullah. It's the Islam that we're understanding from those sources. The best kind of form of Islam that we've been able to get from those sources, that needs to sometimes be improved or updated because some new issue has happened, some new understanding has come about. And so now we have to figure out, how do we incorporate that in? Is this something that can be incorporated? Is it something that has to be rejected? If so, on what basis? What is the evidence because of which we have to reject this? What is the evidence because of which we can bring this in? How can we bring it in? What are the parameters? So all that thought has to happen. That's the job of experts. So sometimes we have these trends of people who are nowhere close to as knowledgeable as these greats in the Hawza, who have gone through academic systems in the West, and they'll come out and say that we're here to reform, we have to reform the system of fiqh. I've studied this whole system for 4 whole years and written a dissertation, so now I'm an expert, and we need to revamp the whole system of fiqh. This whole idea that there's a difference between men and women, it's got to go. That hijab is an obligation. No, we have to rethink this whole thing. Like so many different parts, they'll look at this and say that, no, this has to be rethought. That's fine if you have a question about this, but what expertise do you have? How does your dissertation, how does your few years of dabbling in something compare to somebody who spent 70 years of their life in a tradition that's so grounded, that's so rigorous? If there's reform to be done, then they're the people to do it. Not you and I, not somebody who has very little expertise in anything, some sort of narrow expertise that's not grounded in that tradition at all. They're not the ones to come and try to make changes to Islam itself. What about the rest of us? What kind of islah, what kind of reform can we do? The reform that we can do has to be in line with whatever we're getting from that system of scholarship. Right, so Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, that's before us. That's a duty that you and I can step up to. We're not deciding what is Ma'ruf and what is Munkar. That's been laid down by Allah, by Rasulullah, by the Imams, through the interpretation of the highest level scholars. They've decided that this is haram and this is wajib and this is halal and this is haram. But now it's the duty of us as parents to guide our children and let them know what's good and what's bad, and to guide them along that path. If you're a teacher and you have students who will listen to you, then it becomes a duty there. If you have a circle of friends, you have some influence because you have some more learning than others. If you find that there's something that we should be doing that we haven't been doing until now, then you can influence them and bring them in line and say, look, this is some new learning I got from a class, from a book. I've checked it, I've made sure that I've understood it correctly, and I see we're not doing it. We need to change. And so you cause some reform. You're not reforming Islam, right? But you're helping people to now apply Islam in their life. That's a kind of islah that's within your jurisdiction. And it's a very important islah that has to constantly happen. Until, I'm sure even in the time of Imam al-Hujjah, salamullahi alayhi, these kinds of basic tenets of Islamic law are not going to be suspended. Even in his government, there's going to be need for teaching and reforming and He's going to have teachers, he's going to have people, parents are going to still have to raise their children. It's not like children are going to come out being ma'soom all of a sudden. It's not that children are going to come out ma'soom all of a sudden. They still have to be taught and trained. Parents have to be educated to be able to do that to their children. That's enjoining good and forbidding evil. That's irshadul jahil, that's tarbiyah, that's raising them in an Islamic way. That's islah, you're bringing that child, you're forming them, you're shaping them, shaping their thoughts, their attitudes, making sure that they have the knowledge they need, making sure that the choices they make are good choices. They know where authority lies. They have the proper respect for those things that deserve respect. And all of those things are part of the islah that you and I can do. In the context of the community here, we also have a role, all of us, to do whatever we can to cause islah in the community. There's one time when we come into this existing community and we say that, for instance, just take the example of this room, that, I don't like the barriers here. Let's get rid of the barriers. Let's move them all to the side because it breaks up the space. And I just come in and I have some new idea, and so I just do it. Or I say this should be done, and if someone says no, I say no. It looks like this community doesn't like change, doesn't like to hear new ideas. And I get angry and I say they're not willing to listen to my ideas, so I have nothing to do with this masjid. There is kind of a little bit of a niyyah of islah at the beginning of that, but look at all the ifsad that it caused in the process. If I'm going to come into this space, I should first have the humility and understand, what is this space all about? Who designed it? Somebody put a lot of thought into making everything as it is. If they decided that these barriers should be there, let's find out what the reason is. Let's understand what was the wisdom behind it. What purpose do they serve? Why did the designers and the managers feel like this is the best way to do things? The chairs here, the chairs there. What's the purpose? What's the reason? So just understanding the existing system, because there's a lot of wisdom that went into all of that, experience that went into all of that. So first I should understand, first live with the system, first be part of that community, see how things work. And then if I see that maybe there's some improvement that comes to my mind, that maybe if we do something different, then it would be better, then it's not up to me to say, well, this I've decided, and so this has to be the change that we're going to implement. It doesn't matter if no one else sees my vision, but I have to push it through. No, go into the system, figure out who's in charge, go to that person and say, here, I have some suggestion. Maybe this will improve something in the community. What do you think? Here's why I think it would be better. Make a case for it. But our attitude towards islah of the community should be a very humble one. It's a microcosm for our attitude towards our imam, our attitude towards Allah Himself. We should come to them with full humility and present our skills or our talents, whatever we have, and say, here, I have some skill and talent in this area. If you can use it, then use it. I have some idea that's come to my mind. If you think this is a good idea, then tell me how to implement it, I'll implement it. With the mashwara of the Prophet ﷺ, we see that this was the case. He would seek counsel from his companions, not because he needed the counsel, but it was a training ground for them. And when they would give their suggestions, he would take them, so he would listen to them. But then he wouldn't necessarily act on anyone's suggestion. He might hear everyone and say that, no, actually none of these are the right thing, we're going to do something else. Or he might take someone's suggestion, but he's definitely going to reject someone else's. The right attitude of the one who is rejected should not be that, he's not listening to me, that I'm going to go my own way. You present yourself to the service of the ma'soom, the service of your scholar, the service of Allah, the service of Islam, with that humility to realize that it may not be in the best interest. He's in a position where he can see what's going to work and what's not going to work. He has experience. He knows more than you know. And so maybe your particular idea may not be the best idea. Your attitude was good, that you wanted to try to improve something, so you bring the idea, you suggest it. But then leave it up to the one who's in charge to then make a decision that, yes, it's a good idea, or no, this is not a good idea, it's got to wait till later, there's a better idea that's in play, whatever it is. So whether or not your idea, your effort to do islah is successful in that in that moment, you are actually muslih if you're contributing to the overall health and well-being of that community. Even if your idea was not accepted, you're still right there with whatever idea was accepted. However things have been decided, they are going to go forward. You're part of that. With full energy, with full enthusiasm, that this is what's been decided for the good of the whole community, and I'm also part of it. So how do we know if we're a muslih or mufsid? If we think we're muslih and actually we're deceiving ourselves? Well, it's not that mysterious. It's not such a mystery. The attitude is important. If you have an attitude of humility, if your goal is really for the betterment of that system, this masjid, this community, your family, whatever it might be, and you're willing to see it through. That first person who came in and he wants to change something, but his whole attitude is, I really want my idea to be implemented. There's an ego in there. So it's not really about improving, because in the end he was willing to break ties and say, well, if you're going to reject my idea, then I have nothing to do with you. So in the end, his whole thing was really, I want my idea to be implemented, and if it's not my idea, then I'm going to break. That's all fasad. But if my attitude is to fix, to build, to bring people together, to mend relationships, to maintain good relationships, to really see improvement, those are all signs that there's islah at the base of all of that. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'll finish with one last example and then we'll take a couple of questions. So, we have people who are propagators of Islam, sometimes lecturers, sometimes called minbari or whatever the different terms that we use. You can use the same standards there as well. If you have somebody who is educating people on Islam, lecturing on Islam, and the whole attitude and the effect that they have on the community is to build people, to bring people together, to bring them closer to Islam, make them more devoted to Islam. Those are all good signs that this person, his attitude, his knowledge, his techniques, whatever it might be, are a positive force. And then you have other people who speak, but they don't call people towards any sort of unity and building of Shi'i alliances and these kinds of things. They cause controversy, they cause division. When they come into the room, then there are people who love them, there are people who hate them. They're divisive. There's always controversy surrounding them. Those are mufsideen. They call themselves muslih. They're trying to teach about Islam. They might be very eloquent, maybe very powerful and charismatic. But if the effect they have on the community is to drive people away and either make people lovers of themselves, their ego, or people who hate them, this is not a muslih. This is a mufsid. This is a munafiq. Right? So there are so many examples that we can think of, but my point is that islah, yes, is something that we all have to engage in and we want to engage in, but we have to see what is our jurisdiction. So I should do islah in my own lane, at the level that I can do it. In my family, in my classroom, amongst my friends, in my extended family, whatever your circle of influence is, that's where you can do islah, at a level that you can do it, and you want to see that you're having a good effect on people. You're bringing people towards goodness and Islam and togetherness and love and Allah, Ahlul Bayt. Like those things are the center and focus of all of the islah. Not that you're driving people away, dividing people. Otherwise, what you think is islah is actually ifsad. Recite one more salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Any questions to finish up?
What are your thoughts on issues where you have information from the scholarly community, the mujtahideen, but the lay people in general, the community is not well attuned about it, should you then refrain from any type of islah on issues that they don't really understand, or should you try to educate them and bring them to a higher level?
It's very hypothetical, but again, like stay in our lane. So, what level of influence do you have, right? Do you have the ability? Because sometimes what happens, like there might be some change that needs to happen in the community, but if I were to, mention it, maybe it would push people away. It would make people very confused. It would cause a lot of fitna and those kinds of things. Even though it's the right thing, I'm calling towards the right thing, but if I don't take the right steps to prepare people and educate people and kind of just be very practical about how society changes, then I could cause more harm than good. Right? So, staying in your lane would mean in this case, maybe work together with people who have influence if you don't have influence yourself. So work together with the scholar of the community and say, what do you think about introducing this idea? How should we do it? How can we go about it? What are some steps that we can take? If I can be of service, and if I can do anything to help that process, what can I do? And then let him, you brought on his radar that, okay, this is maybe he didn't pay attention or he didn't know or whatever it might be. So then he can start to think that, okay, yes, over the course of the next year, let's plan to make this change. But to get there, what do we need to do to maybe prepare people so that it's not jarring and divisive and makes people, for instance, leave the masjid and say, I never want to come here again because now they're talking about some new thing. I've never heard anyone for generations say something and now he's saying something new. Sometimes people's attitude is that this must be a bid'ah, right? Rather than seeing that actually, no, we were ignorant and this was right and now I need to change myself to get in line with what's right.
Assalamu alaikum. So, Maulana, when you said faqih, is faqih a jurist, whose specialty is jurisprudence, or it's mujtahid is how do you differentiate between mujtahid and faqih and the one who do taqleed?
These are interchangeable terms.
Okay.
So faqih, mujtahid, mufti, and then English jurist or jurisprudent. All of these are terms that mean the same thing, referring to the same kind of scholar.
Okay.
Yeah, someone who's reached the highest level, reached a level where they now have the expertise to be able to go to the sources of Quran and Sunnah and figure out how to address any given practical problem with those sources. If someone has the skills to do that, then they are a mujtahid or faqih or mufti or whatever you might want to say. But it's one part of Islamic learning. So that's one kind of scholar. You might have a scholar who is expert in some other area of history or tafsir or something else who's not a mujtahid. Yeah. All right, one more here and then over there.
So Maulana, you said system is set up based on the experience. I'm not talking about the Islam, I'm talking about general systematic behavior, right? So when you are inside the system, you don't see the gaps, right? But somebody outside the system sees the gaps sometimes, right? So should not be system inclusive to people who have some suggestions and maybe give a second thought instead of thinking that they are experienced and they are doing very well and there is no need of filling the gaps?
Yeah, that's not the idea. That's not what I was advocating at all. It's not that we, for instance, I know best, no one else should say anything. That's not the idea. But if you're coming with a suggestion, the attitude that you come with that suggestion should be one of humility, that you're presenting it to the leadership, for instance, and saying, here's a new idea, what do you think about this? And yes, the leadership should also be receptive to that. And alhamdulillah, in the case of this masjid, Shayk Faiz is always asking for suggestions, and if you have any idea, there's any activity that you think should happen, come, let's talk about it. But one good thing about the organization is that whatever happens should be bounced off through the system. It shouldn't be that, I have some great idea and I want to have a class and I just say, I'm just going to do it. I never consult with the leadership. I should first, consult and say, here, I want to do this. What do you think? Is it okay? And they'll say yes, or they'll say no, whatever it is. But then it's all part of that system. So that, yes, the attitude of the leadership should be one of receptivity. But I think more importantly, or more often lacking, is that the suggestion should also come with humility. And really the attitude of islah, not ego.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Amar bil Maruf and Nahy Anil Munkar are true. However, it takes it's not for everyone to, start telling others that, you're this or that is wrong, or, you're whatever. So I think one of the things that it requires, for this, is to have that particular background, plus skills, plus a style of saying things. I mean, sometimes a very good thing becomes a bad thing because you use a wrong choice of words.
Yeah.
And so I think, one of the attitudes that people have is, oh, this is an Islamic duty that I should, tell everyone else, and it is our fruwadeen. However, it's something which ends up with the negative connotations rather than, making a positive improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that is part of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy Anil Munkar. So I mentioned it very quickly as these are prerequisites. So before I enjoin good or forbid evil, I have to have the requisite knowledge to know what I'm talking about. I have to, there has to be some possibility of receptivity. If I know that you're not going to listen to me, then I have no duty to tell you. I have to feel safe from harm. It shouldn't be that if I tell you, you're going to hurt me, for instance. I should feel safe from that harm. So these are all, and then I should preserve your dignity. I should use the very least amount of input to bring about the change. So if it's enough for me just to hint at something, then I can't tell you directly. If it's enough for me to tell you directly, I can't do anything more. So I just have to, satisfy myself with the very least, because the whole point is not for me to tell you. The point is to get you in line. And how can I most effectively get you in line? That takes a lot of wisdom. It's not always by coming and telling you directly, frankly, and saying, I just have to tell you, whether you like it or not. That's not usually going to work with people. It's got to be very subtle, very careful, very respectful, and sometimes beating around the bush, or maybe there's someone else you'll listen to better. So get that person to tell instead of you, because maybe you have some, you're not able to say it in the right way. So all of those things are part of actually the laws of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy Anil Munkar. And if we are doing it ineffectively and rudely and driving people away, it's because we're doing it wrong. Then someone needs to enjoin good and forbid evil about how to enjoin good and forbid evil. Right?
So some of the contemporary issues, like for example this LGBT and those things, so from Islam we have a clear perspective of what's halal and what's haram. Yet in this country, do you think it's important to discuss it with the children, especially that they're exposed to the other society? Do you think it's a subject that we should discuss with our children openly, or is it something that we tell? Sometimes the general tendency is to hush it and not speak about it. But what is your perspective on this, as a scholar of the West?
Yeah. Definitely. We have to get ahead of it. Not only this, but other kinds of sinful behavior and other kinds of things that we're exposed to, our kids are exposed to. They're exposed at a very early age. And like this kind of wishful thinking that, my kids are good, they'll never have any thoughts about these kinds of things, they'll never be exposed to it. That almost never is true in the world that we live in. Maybe even if they're homeschooled, even if they're in Islamic school, they're still not sheltered fully from the culture around. And these things are in everything, everywhere. Even in the most innocent seeming media, you have these elements that are introduced. And if you are not ahead of the curve, if you don't proactively prepare your kids for it in a way that's appropriate, age appropriate, right? Then by the time they get into the teenage years, they're not nearly as receptive to your input as they were before that. Now they're more argumentative by nature. Right? So it becomes much more difficult to now start some influence, start some new idea, than if it's already been planted. You've already kind of prepared them and strengthened them and made them aware of what's haram and what's halal in some general way, again, in a way that's age appropriate. Then it becomes easier to carry on that discussion and reinforce it and give them more information that helps them to understand why this position is the right position. But if you've kept them in a bubble and all of a sudden they're exposed to things in school and through media, and it's very easy for our kids also to have kind of a two-facedness where they can live one way at school and live one way at home, and you may never know how they are at school, right? All of us probably have aspects of that. Maybe we are very different at work and very different here in the masjid. It's just a natural, we kind of conform. It's not a bad thing. We have to kind of conform in the way we talk, the way we behave. Maybe it's a little bit different. As long as it's all within what we should be doing, it's fine. But that two-facedness can come in, and then you may not be aware. That happens so often, that a good family, good upbringing of the kids, and then they thought everything was going well until it wasn't. Right? Because you don't know necessarily all that your kids are involved in and all the ideas they're exposed to. If you're not proactive, then yeah, definitely it'll come back to bite you later. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to be true muslihin, and let us protect ourselves against fasad, and let us never be mufsideen. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم صل